Hello, YouTube viewers. Welcome to my channel, CCM Drummer. My name is Matthew Jackson. And today, I'm just getting the camera focused a little bit there. Okay, I'm continuing in my series on the Jesus Music movie. I'm giving a review and my observations on the movie. This segment is part 5. In part 1, I gave a general review and talked about my brief encounter with Amy Grant. In part 2, I took the producers to task for inserting a Martin Luther King quote that was 61 years old and how they took it out of context. And I also debunked the myth that CCM Music somehow laid a claim on Kirk Franklin's song Stomp. Okay. In the third segment, what did I talk about in the third segment? So we get so many segments, I'm starting to forget. I talked about segregation and integration in CCM Music because the charge was made by John J. Thompson that CCM became more and more segregated. Well, that wasn't true, and I defeated that argument. In part 4, I responded to comments made by Mandisa and Lecrae. And then I also began talking about what Michael Tait said in his comments because he was interviewed. And that's where I'm going to continue now. That's where I'm going to, this is in part 5. I'm going to finish up on Michael Tait and then I'm going to respond to some of the things that Kirk Franklin said as well. But before I do that, please like my channel or dislike, make comments, share. Above all, subscribe. And so let me get started. All right, as I said in the previous video, Michael Tait was traveling through Tennessee, and he stopped off in Tracy City at some podunk store place. I don't know if he bought gas and ghee dunks or if it was just ghee dunks or whatever, but he went to the checkout counter, and the clerk says, "Is this all you want, boy?" And so he called him boy. And then he says, "You better get out of here because it's getting dark and, we're going to hang you after dark." So there he threatened him. And of course, now this would be an example of racism because you're threatening a person's life or intimidating a person solely based on their race. That's a good example of racism, where the comments said about Mandisa, they were racial comments, but not racist comments. So there's a difference between being racial and racist. Anyway, yeah, Michael Tait definitely got some racial or racist comments. Now, for the sake of those of you who don't know who Michael Tait is, he was with DC Talk from, don't make a liar out of me, from the late 80s to the early 2000s, and then after that, he hooked up with the Newsboys in 2009. So he's got awards. Well, he's got, good grief, he's got 16 Dove Awards with DC Talk and 5 nominations, Dove Award nominations. In the Grammy category, he won 4 Grammys with DC Talk and was nominated for 2. So yeah, so he's got a good track record. And when he was with DC Talk, he was nominated for 7 Doves. Yeah, and Newsboys had 9 hits during his tenure with the Newsboys. They've actually had more than that, but while Michael Tait was with them, that's how many they got. So anyway, enough of Michael Tait's resume. Now, Michael Tait did go on to say how bad he felt because he was talked to that way, and very understandable. Now, as tragic as Michael's story is about running into that redneck and threatening and intimidating his life, and as despicable as it is, and certainly that's a story that needs to be told. However, I take exception with the producers of the show, of the Jesus people, of the Jesus Music movie, excuse me, produced by Andrew and John Irwin. why would they would put Michael Tait's story in this movie? Okay, because this is a story about the history of Jesus music and CCM. So how does this goofy redneck that intimidated Michael Tait, how does that link up to CCM? How is this CCM's problem? How is it CCM's fault? Okay. Was the guy that said that, was he a CCM artist? Was he a CCM producer? What? How is he linked to CCM? Well, he isn't linked. It's just a tragic story that should not have happened. By the way, in the previous video in part 4, I said that this event happened in 2000, year 2000. Actually, it happened in either 2004 or 2003, because in the movie Michael Tait said 17 years ago. Well, the movie came out in 2021, so it was either 2004, or if you said maybe he was taped uh, in 2020, and if it was 17 years ago, it would have been 2003. Who knows? Whatever. Now, one thing you got to understand about these interviews and these documentaries, a guy like Michael Tait and these other artists, they'll sit in a chair, interview chair, for several hours. And the producers, the directors will ask them questions, and they'll talk off the top of their head and ramble on for quite some time. And then when they edit the movie for the final edit, they'll cherry pick certain sound bites and then put them in the movie. So I would say maybe 20 or 30% of what the artist said in an interview actually what makes it into the movie. The rest of it gets left on the editing room floor. So that's what happened. So yeah, I just take the producers the task for even putting this in the movie in the first place, because it doesn't advance the story about the history of Jesus music and CCM. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. That's the point. Now, if you want to do a documentary on race relations in America in the 21st century, then what Michael Tait said might be appropriate for that movie, but not for this movie. Okay, let me move on to Mr. Kirk Franklin. Oh, he said a lot. And let me start. So you see, he made one, two, three. Yeah, three comments. And let me get to the first one. He said, quote, "You want to find a loving way to be able to have these conversations about racial reconciliation. There is still not a tangible plan to address the separation between these two worlds. And until that is addressed, we will never find the healing that is really needed for this country." Okay, so he made a call for racial reconciliation. Now, my question to Kirk Franklin is, Kurt, if you're watching, in your mind, what does racial reconciliation look like? What would have to happen in order for you to be satisfied that racial reconciliation actually occurred? You said that there's not a tangible plan to address the separation between the two worlds. Okay, there's no plan. Who is supposed to be coming up with this plan to address this separation between the two worlds? You criticize somebody for not coming up with a plan. Okay, if you think there's a separation between the two worlds and we need to have a plan to address it, what is stopping you from coming up with a plan to address the separation between the two worlds? If you feel that there needs to be a plan, why don't you come up with a plan? You're a big superstar performer. You've got a stage, you've got a platform to work that plan from. So what's stopping you from coming up with a plan? Okay, his next quote number 2. If we have the light of the world, no wonder why the world is so dark, because our light is fragmented. Okay, Maybe it is. I don't know. And if you think it's fragmented because we don't have a tangible plan to address the separation between the two worlds and racial reconciliation, um, okay. Now, this next comment is a doozy. He actually made this comment at the Dove Awards, at the GMA Dove Awards in 2016, when he was awarded, I think it was the male gospel artist of the year or something like that. It was a very, and he was also awarded that same award in 2019 as well, I believe. And he says this: I want to say something to everyone in the spirit of humility. There is chaos and calamity in the world, and there is so much hurt and distrust. And I have a lot of friends in this room of many shades of colors that have walked a life for the last 23 years with. When we say something, we want to bring it together. When police are killed, we need to say something. When black boys are killed, we need to say something. We have the spirit of redemption when we speak. And when we don't say something, we're saying something. At our concerts and our churches, I beg of you, let's ask the people that we are accountable to stand in front of and pray for us for racial healing. Let's don't be silent on it. So again, in his first comment, he talks about racial reconciliation. The last comment, he's talking about racial healing. Okay, Kurt, there are a lot of injustices in our society that we should say something about. What about abortion? What about babies being killed at our local abortion mills? We need to say something about that. And if we're not saying something, we're saying something. What about human trafficking? We need to say something about that. And if we're not saying something, we're saying something. Yes, black boys being killed when cops are being killed, those are tragic things and injustices too. I think it's also worth noting most of the black boys who are being killed by other black boys. Most of the homicide victims who are black, most of the black homicide victims are murdered by other blacks. If you're a black person, statistically, you have a higher percentage of being victimized by another black person than you do by a police officer or a white person. Why don't we say something about that? Why don't we say something about the black children who are, 7, 4, 5, toddlers, preteen kids, 7 or 8, 9, school kids who are going home from school and they catch stray bullets because rival gangs are fighting over drug turf. Why don't we say something about that? We lose a lot of young black kids to drive-by shootings from stray bullets. And if we're not saying something about that, we're saying something. What about the drug trade in the inner city ghettos where these shootouts are happening? Why isn't the liberal mayors having their police departments put a stop to the drug trafficking and have heavy policing? Why aren't the governors of these liberal blue states sending in the National Guard and stopping the drug trade? Because the drug trade is the root cause of this. Well, I could go on to more root causes. There's a 70% out of wedlock birth rate in the black community. Many of the homes in the black communities are headed up by single mothers and absentee fathers. And if we don't say something about that, we're saying something. So, yeah, if you want to talk about injustices, we could go on and on and on and on. So, that's all I have to say about that. Let me go ahead and close this video and this series by saying this. And I want to talk to Andrew and John Irwin, who are the producers. And I want to talk to Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith, who were the who were the top billed executive producers of this show, this movie, the Jesus Music movie. There's a lot of things that I could criticize about CCM music. You know, I wished all the artists had theology that was as perfect as mine. I wished all the CCM artists would write lyrics to their songs that were perfectly biblically sound. I wish they would live lives that were exemplary and didn't have any weaknesses or sins to deal with. I wish they would speak up on social issues like LGBTQ and speak out against abortion and other injustices, even if it means them losing some popularity and maybe less people going to their concerts and less people buying their records. Yeah, there's a lot of things I don't like about CCM music and what's happening in today's CCM world that I could criticize and I could go on and on and on. But I tell you one thing, there's one thing that CCM music doesn't have to apologize for that is not guilty of, and it's racism. They are not guilty of racism, and they don't have to apologize one iota about race. That's one thing that's not wrong with CCM. And I resent the Irwin brothers actually playing the race card in this video in that short 7 minute segment, playing the race card, race baiting, giving the viewer the perception that there's some strain of racism within the CCM community. And alleging racism where racism doesn't exist, that's racism. That's wrong. So while I applaud the Irwin brothers for documenting CCM and Jesus music. On one hand, they did the Jesus music and CCM music a great service by documenting our history. I appreciate that. But on the other hand, they did CCM music a great disservice by implicating CCM as having some problems with race and being racist, when that's not true at all. So that's my commentary. That concludes the entire series on on my commentary and observations on the Jesus Music movie. Thank you for watching. Please, again, subscribe to my channel and watch some of my CCM drum covers. This is what CCM Drummer is all about. My channel is promoting CCM. If you want to criticize CCM for what CCM has done wrong or what its faults are, that's fine. Go for it. But do not unfairly criticize CCM, because when you do, you're going to be hearing from CCM Drummer. I am not going to just sit by and let that go unchallenged. So thank you. God bless. Have a good day.